I don't know a lot about the Decred.
Kidding about printing.
Flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank.
I wish I was more educated on Decred. Decred. He is bullish on Decred.
Welcome. In this session, we're going to look at mining and blockchains and see how proof of work mining works and how Decred differs from pure proof of work to make it more secure in the long run. This is a really interesting debate and it kind of gets a little bit complex, but we're going to try and do it in a simple fashion. And as we go through these next few videos, we're going to try and build up this information and try and build up our knowledge to make sure that we understand why blockchains are so important and why this information that we have and the way that the systems works is really going to change the future of finance. So let's delve in, let's have a little look. So first thing we need to look at then is the pure proof of work. So mining is really about the time stamping of the network. It's about building the database before it gets distributed and making sure that blocks can't be mined more frequently than possible, making sure that the pages of the database kind of are put together in a logical fashion and not bombarded. So this is an example of what the Bitcoin pure proof of work chain would look like. So the first thing on the left hand side, you'll notice that we've got our transaction. Now as a common user, that's pretty much all you're going to see. You're just going to see you passing money to somebody else. End of story, it's done. Okay, but there's a few things that happen in the background. So the first thing that happens is the transaction that you're making gets passed to the nodes. This then gets synchronized across and it builds a mempool across hundreds and thousands of different computers, and they all hold this mempool along with all the previous blocks. And as they're building their mempool, they're just looking to make sure that that transaction can happen, to make sure the money that's being spent is actually linked to the person's account that's trying to spend it. So once they're happy, it gets added to this mempool and it gets ready to get passed to the block. So that's the center bit. Now over on the right, we have the proof of work miners. Now, initially they work completely separate, and all they're doing is they're trying to find a solution to a problem. Now, once they've found a solution, the first miner that solves the problem gets to build the next block. They get given what's called a hash. So as soon as they've got the hash, they can then send off for all these transactions that are in the mempool, and then the transactions can come back, start being processed before they get added to the block. Now, once the miner is happy and once the nodes are happy that all the transactions are in the right way, it gets ticked off and the block gets added to the blockchain, and then it's immutable. So at this point, it's going to be very difficult to change apart from a reorg. Now, it's important to note that in the pure proof of work chain, the only people that can interact with the chain directly is the miners. Okay, so they are the only ones that can actually do a reorg, so reorganize the blocks. Okay, and this is where one of the problems for pure proof of work comes in. It can be referred to as many things. I've heard it referred to as a majority attack, a 51% attack, and it's basically, or a double spending attack. And it's basically where a miner can start building a chain in secret, and then as soon as they get the required hash, they can spend some money, reorg the chain, and then input a new block with all these reorged blocks where the money was never spent. So that's why in order for a pure proof of work chain to be effective, it needs lots of hash power, lots of computer power. So in the old days, you would have just seen lots of people running one or two computers to kind of maintain this network and to build it out. Nowadays, people need factories of these computers to kind of make sure that it's profitable for themselves, but also to make sure that the network remains healthy. And the more hash power it's got, theoretically, the more secure the chain is. However, that becomes problematic at the point where one person owns all the hash rate, and all the time the rewards are incentivized and they're in the right way. This is fine. A miner won't do the wrong thing. But the minute the rewards no longer incentivize good behavior, that's when you're going to start finding miners not doing the right thing, and you'll start finding them attacking the chain in secret just so that they can make a little bit extra money. And that may sound unscrupulous, but these are the sorts of things that people that have skin in the game will need to do in order to make themselves profitable. All the time that there's enough proof of work and it's spread out, that's not ever going to be a problem. It's only when it becomes centralized. Now, the problem with mining, because it needs so much hash power, what you're going to find is there's only two kinds of people that can run these systems successfully. That's going to be nation states and big business, okay? So ultimately, pure proof of work is a really secure mechanism for now. In the future, I think there's a big question mark over whether it can maintain this security and this decentralization. And we're already starting to see these miners on certain chains, not the Bitcoin chain, but on certain chains where they're acting a bit dubious just so they can make profits, okay? So this is the Bitcoin proof chain, pure proof of work, and most of the proof of work chains do work this way. They do work as a pure proof of work. So it's important to know what the miners do. So the first thing we need to understand is they're building blocks, okay? In the Decred blockchain, they're building a 0.4 megabyte block every 5 minutes, and then they're adding it to the blockchain and maintaining that blockchain along with the nodes. Currently, the Decred blockchain is about 5 gig. In terms of Bitcoin, the miners are building blocks of about 1 megabyte every 10 minutes, and the chain is something like 300 gigabytes, okay? So they're using their computer power to gain a hash. The hash is the thing that locks all of these blocks together, and it puts them in order, okay? So it has to link the last block's hash with the first block's hash, and this is kind of, if you change the block hash, which is just a string of characters, you will change, it will break that block, and it won't be able to process, and it won't work, okay? And that's what makes it so successful. So once again, the miners are in charge of getting the hash. The first person that gets the hash or solves the problem gets to build the next block, and they get the reward for it. The next thing is the mining difficulty. So the actual network determines the mining difficulty based on how many miners are mining, so how much hash power there is, how many computers there are, and the time that it wants to produce a block. So if there's loads of computers mining and it needs to produce a 10-minute block, the mining difficulty will actually go up. If there's fewer hash power, the mining difficulty will come down to try and maintain that 10-minute block. The next thing is the miners the first miner that gets the problem solved will also get the block reward and all the transaction fees. So blocks are filled with transactions, so that the miner will get a block reward, which is basically a newly minted coin, and they're also going to get all the transaction fees for each of the transactions in that block. And then the final thing, in order for them to successfully build a block, they do need to follow a certain set of rules. In the Decred chain, these rules are verified by stakeholders, but in the pure proof of work chain, they're verified by the software and the miner alone. So the next thing we need to look at then is, how does Decred's proof of work, proof of stake hybrid chain work? So as you can see, we've still got the same 3 blocks. It does get slightly more difficult when you look at it compared to the pure proof of work, but this is just so we have an extra layer of security. So fundamentally, the first step is exactly the same. On the left hand side, we send and receive transactions to each other, and the user, the person using the system, doesn't know anything else. They just send the transaction, it gets verified a couple of times, job done, their part in the whole thing is finished. In the background, that transaction gets relayed to the node exactly the same way in pure proof of work. The nodes get to make sure that the transactions are actually linked to the correct accounts. They maintain the blockchain previous to make sure they can do that. Once they're happy that the transaction being made is allowed to be made, that transaction can then be added to the mempool. Then once again, the proof of work miners are working in the background, completely separate on their own at this point, and they are trying to find that computational problem. The first person that finds it sends off to get all the transactions they need for that block from the mempool, and then they start building, or the transactions get sent to be processed. Once they're processed and they then get added to the block. Now, as you can see, from that point of view, from that perspective, is exactly the same as pure proof of work. But then what happens is the next block starts to get built, but the previous block then gets voted on, and the actual previous block can't get added to the blockchain until it has at least 3 votes included in the block. If it has at least 3 votes included in the block, it will get passed to the blockchain and all is good. And what the voters are looking for is to make sure that all the rules have been followed exactly the way it's meant to be in the blockchain. If it doesn't get 3 votes, it actually gets rejected, and all the transactions go back to the mempool, and the block has to be rebuilt. Okay, so that's important. The next block actually can't, although it started to be built, it actually can't be completed until all that voting process is finished, and it gets passed. If it gets rejected, then you have to do the reorg on that particular block and just make sure everything goes through. Now, as you can see, just by having that extra mechanism where the miners don't get to be the only people that get to interact with the chain, and now these voting nodes get to interact with the chain, you can see it does add a little bit of extra security. It also adds a little bit of extra complexity. Now, to make sure that there's no funny business there, the voters also get rewarded for their efforts. So they have to stake their tickets for like 140 something days. So they have to have skin in the game and get to vote, and then they get rewarded with a part of the block reward. So the block reward doesn't solely go to the miner in this particular case. There is also another mechanism that makes Decred really secure, that nodes will reject a reorg of up to 5 blocks. So if a miner is mining in secret and then they try and put the new block into the current block system with all these reorg blocks for a double spend, they have to do it within 25 minutes on the Decred chain, because it has to be included within the last 5 blocks. If it's not, then the node will reject it instantly because of the mechanism that says, look, if it's older than 5 blocks, we're not allowed to accept it. So that also makes it more secure. So you won't find secret miners being able to do these really deep reorgs, going back to the beginning of time or whatever, and kind of changing all the transactions, which once again kind of prevents this 51% attack, prevents this respend attack, and makes the chain hyper secure. And as we've looked at previously, you can see that it does take a lot more money to attack the Decred chain, and also anyone that attacks it would need to own tickets as well as hash power, and that means they've already got their money locked up in the system. So if they're attacking it and the price of Decred goes down, they are going to lose money rather than gain it. So the incentives here are really well aligned, and it's a really interesting one. And if we will go deeper into this in future weeks, just to kind of consolidate this information. But as you can see, these extra mechanisms are really interesting. So the next thing is the information that goes into a block. Now, in past videos, we've looked at the charts and the blockchain explorer, and a lot of people that are not familiar with blockchains might go, well, where is all this information coming up? Is someone just sat on the end of their computer typing it in and making it all up and kind of putting it all in whenever? But actual fact, all of the information from those charts and all those information from the block explorer comes from the full chain itself, because every block is like a database. It includes all the information you need, and when you extract all the blocks in the chain, that's when you get the open database, and you can see exactly what's gone into it. So the Decred block has got loads of information. I've put a few things here. Obviously, I won't go into too much of it, but just wanted to show you that the block header kind of includes the majority of the information, and then the block transactions go in and they get put into a staked Merkle root and a Merkle root, which includes a single hashes for each of those of all the transactions, and this helps it condense the database. The information that you would expect to find here, things like how many tickets were bought during that block, how many transactions are in that block, how big the block is, so the block size, what is the height of that block, so in the position, or how high is the blockchain. So you can actually relay all of those blocks to find out that there is over 500,000 blocks in the Decred system. What point was it time stamped? And remember, because it's a block, this will never be changed. It gets time stamped at a point and that's it. But I mean, at the moment you can see that there's loads of information, but blockchains can actually include lots of information. And this is why a lot of people are finding them very, very interesting, because they can start thinking, well, actual fact, I can timestamp information into that block so that anyone can validate its proof. And there was a story just recently about some Brazilian governments or politicians or something like that, where they had used the Decred blockchain to timestamp something to do with an election. I think it was donations and things like that. And I thought that made it really interesting that it was locking in data into the Decred system, and it just showed another use case for blockchains, which I thought was really interesting. But that's pretty much it for what I wanted to talk about today. So as you can see, security is the single most important factor concerning the long-term success of a cryptocurrency project, and Decred is probably one of the most secure chains in existence right now because of this hybrid proof of stake, proof of work. Now, don't be fooled by any means. At the end of the day, blockchains, their most promising use case is money. And when it comes to money, security is everything. Think about it in terms of real money, or I say real money, but paper money. And if your wallet got stolen, how kind of annoyed you would be, or if someone hacked into your debit card, how annoyed you would be. And that's the point, is if this is going to work, it needs to be secure. And this is why I'm so kind of interested in Decred, is because it's made this really secure network, and it's made it a flexible network that can improve over time. And as problems become apparent, it can solve those problems. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Once again, support the channel by liking this video, giving us a thumbs up, give us a comment. It's always interesting if you think that any of this information isn't right, or any of this information could be improved, or you disagree. It'd be great to get a comment just to find out, how we can improve this, or different thoughts. And I'm always, as long as the comment below is, informative, I'm up for it. I don't mind being critiqued at all. I think it's really healthy, actually. And then finally, if you want to support the channel by doing a small donation, you can do so right there. And that would be fantastic. So I'll see you next time.
I don't know a lot about the Decred.
Kidding about flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank.
I wish I was more educated on Decred. Decred. He is bullish on Decred.